NSA and ASD provide some guidance on how to detect and defend against web shells.
So Matt, I understand you've got a story on web shells for us.
Yeah, I do. So this is actually kind of an interesting treat. It seems that the NSA and the Australian ASD, so I would say are pretty much counterpart organizations, put together a joint document and release some source code to help people determine whether or not there are web shells on their servers and get rid of them. So for most of our viewers, you might know what a web shell is already, but for some of those who don't, a web shell is basically a bit of code that an attacker will drop onto a system to basically run as a web page or service that offers access to that system. So you might find the ability to run arbitrary commands, to browse the file system, to upload and download and delete files. So basically, they have a couple recommendations because web shells are pretty common. If an attacker finds a way onto a web server and a way to upload files, one of the first things they'll probably do is try and drop a web shell because that'll give them further access and a much more um, an easier to use interface to sort of further poke around that system. So the recommendations that they have are probably the best one is matching against known good. So basically, if you've got a web server and you know what files belong there and what they look like, you can hash them, and then you can periodically check and say, hey, do all the files that I've got on my server still match what they used to? And if there's any changes that are unexpected, then you should go and investigate because it's possible that somebody may have uploaded a new file or inserted some code into an existing file to serve as a web shell. So ultimately, you can use either their script, which they've provided, or you can come up with your own. There's plenty of file integrity monitoring systems you could choose from to do that, but doing that is probably one of the best first steps. Don't trust timestamps when you're doing that because changing timestamps in a file system is pretty easy to fake. Anomaly detection is another one. So if you've got logs, and you should have logs for your web services, you can see if there are new types of requests, a higher frequency of requests, or a larger volume of requests than what you're expecting. And then from there, take a look at them and say, okay, all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of requests to a page I'm not familiar with, or a parameter, or something else that's different may indicate that someone's put a web shell on your server and you can respond to it. They talk about signature-based detection, and they do offer some, except signature-based is fairly easy to defeat. I mean, a lot of these ones that are very common, like the C99 shell, if you wanted to rename something or change a parameter around, you could easily beat a signature-based detection. But, the sorts of behaviors that you would see when someone's logged into a web shell, or the sorts of things that have to occur for a web shell to be installed, are better ways of detecting them. So they say patch, obviously. If a bad guy can't get the file on the server in the first place, that's a win. Harden, so limit your permissions. If there's a user that has to have access to like just a few files, only provision them that, and then lock them out of everything else. Isolate your hosts because sometimes what an attacker will do is jump onto your box, install a web shell, and then pivot from there. So if you can't get any further than that one box, that is somewhat of a victory. And again, watch for file changes. So they provided a PDF that's interesting to read, and then there's a GitHub repo associated with it that I recommend you guys check out.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm a big fan of file integrity checkers. I've been a Tripwire fan since Gene first wrote it almost 30 years ago. Um, system administrators should be regularly doing that anyway. And so if you have, if you've hashed all of the good, parts of your application, and every time you update it, then you update that database, then it ought to jump out at you if somebody drops something new on there or modifies something outside of an official change control. So yeah, that's an oldie but goodie that I highly recommend.
Yeah, I would I would say that from at least I think the first one that you had mentioned, which was I think checking or at least like running a script that checks the current image and checks it against a known good image. For most folks, I think when they look at something like that, especially if you've already got a current environment that's already set up and running, ensuring that the image that you're going to use as your good image is in fact a good image and you're not checking against a already compromised image, right? So just make sure that that's checked before you actually start using that as your golden to check against. So, but yeah, I think it's a pretty good list of things to run through. Keep yourself really secure.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is permissions of the directories that hold the files that make up your web application. Most of those should not be writable, by anybody, except when you're making updates to the application. But the directories where all of that executable stuff goes should not be writable by the web server application. That'll prevent users from dropping new executable content in there. Things like that. I mean, we've talked about these things on and off for years, but this is, I think, a good collection, summary of a lot of the tips that we've been trying to give for years on how to run a web application safely.
Sure. And I think if web shows are a new topic for you, this is a pretty darn good starting point.
One thing that was clear from that was that there, obviously this isn't something new, clearly, and it's something that's pretty prevalent across the internet, right? So I think they were showing something, I think it was maybe they took a stat from Microsoft, something about 77,000 like web shells. And I don't remember if that was a daily count or, but it's clearly something that's out there. So we may have talked about this stuff till we're blue in the face, but it's still out there, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.